The park was quiet for a Saturday morning. Derek Ellis sat on a bench near the walking path, watching his 7-year-old daughter the way he always did in open spaces. Not hovering, just present. Lily wasn't playing. She was standing a few feet ahead of him, completely still, staring across the path at a woman sitting alone on the opposite bench. The woman was dressed for a boardroom. Tailored coat, heels that made no sense on a gravel path. She held a coffee cup in both hands but wasn't drinking it, just holding it, staring at her phone without reading anything on it. Lily turned and stepped close to her father. She cupped her hands and whispered near his ear, her voice so small it barely cleared the space between them. "Dad, she looks really tired." "People get tired, baby." "Not sleepy tired." Lily pulled back just enough to look at him. "The other kind." Before he could respond, she added, quietly, with a certainty that didn't belong to a 7-year-old, "Please marry her." Derek went still. He wanted to laugh it off the way parents do, but Lily wasn't smiling. She was watching him with those patient eyes that had always seen more than they should, and she looked like she had been thinking about this for longer than just this morning. He looked back at the woman across the path, a stranger, someone who existed in an entirely different world from the one he and his daughter had built together. He didn't understand why his daughter had chosen her, but he couldn't pretend the question didn't matter. If you're new here, this channel is where we tell stories about the quiet moments that change everything. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Now let's get back to Derek and Lily. Derek Ellis was 34 years old and had not slept past 6 in the morning in 3 years. Not because he couldn't, because there was always something. A lunch to pack, a braid to attempt, a permission slip he'd forgotten to sign the night before. Fatherhood, he had learned, was less about grand gestures and more about the accumulation of small tasks completed before the rest of the world woke up. He had gotten good at it. Not perfect. He burned toast more often than he'd admit, and Lily's braids still came out uneven on the left side, no matter how many YouTube tutorials he watched at midnight, but good enough. Consistent. Present. That was what he told himself mattered most. He worked as a freelance audio technician, taking contracts for live events, recording sessions, corporate functions. The work was irregular but honest, and it kept them in a decent apartment in a decent neighborhood where Lily could walk to school and Derek could know the names of the people on their floor. It wasn't the life he had planned at 25, but it was the life he had, and he had made his peace with that distinction. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife, Renata, to an illness that moved faster than any of them expected. She was 31. Lily was 4. Derek remembered very little of the first year after, only the mechanics of it, the getting through each day that required a specific kind of numbness he was not proud of but understood was necessary. What he remembered clearly was the moment he realized Lily was watching him to decide how to feel. That was the moment he stopped being numb. He couldn't afford it anymore. Since then, his life had no room for carelessness. Every decision passed through a single filter. Is this good for Lily? It was not a burden. It was the only organizing principle that made sense. Lily, for her part, was not a difficult child. She was quiet in the way that some children are. Not shy, not sad, just interior. She processed the world slowly and privately, and then occasionally said something that stopped adults mid-sentence. Her kindergarten teacher had called Derek in twice in 1 month, not for bad behavior, but because Lily had said things that were, in the teacher's words, a little unsettling in how perceptive they were. Derek had nodded and thanked her and privately felt something between pride and unease. The park was their Saturday ritual. Derek brought coffee. Lily brought a book she rarely read, preferring instead to watch the people moving through the space. Joggers, dog walkers, old men playing chess near the fountain. She cataloged them without judgment, or at least without any judgment Derek could identify. She just looked. She had been doing it since she was old enough to sit still. The woman across the path, the one Lily had been watching that morning with unusual focus, was named Vivian Cole. Derek didn't know that yet. What he could see from 30 feet away was someone who carried herself with the particular posture of a person accustomed to being in charge. Straight spine, deliberate stillness, the kind of composed expression that takes years to maintain. Her coat alone probably cost more than Derek's equipment bag. Her heels were impractical for the gravel, and she seemed entirely indifferent to that fact. She looked from a distance like someone who had everything arranged exactly as she intended. She also looked, and this was the thing Derek could not quite dismiss after Lily said it, like someone running on empty in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He just hadn't let himself notice it until his daughter pointed it out. Derek had every intention of letting it go. He would redirect Lily, explain, gently the way he always tried to do things, that they don't stare at strangers, that they certainly don't ask their fathers to marry strangers, and that they should probably head to the farmer's market before the good bread sold out. That was the plan. It was a reasonable plan. Lily was already walking across the path before he finished forming it. She moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided something and saw no reason to delay. Derek stood up immediately, the way parents do when a child moves toward an unvetted situation, and followed close behind. Close enough to intervene, too late to stop it. Lily stopped in front of the woman's bench. She waited until the woman looked up from her phone. "Your coffee is cold," Lily said. "You should get a new one." It was not a question, not quite advice either, just an observation, delivered with the matter-of-fact directness that Lily applied to most things she considered obvious. The woman looked at her, then down at the cup in her hands, then back up, past Lily to Derek, who had arrived a half step behind his daughter with an expression that was equal parts apology and helplessness. "I'm sorry," he said. "She does this." "Does what?" the woman asked. Her voice was even, unhurried, not cold but controlled in the way that suggested she decided, moment to moment, exactly how much warmth to extend. "Tells people things they didn't ask to be told," Derek said. The corner of the woman's mouth moved, something genuine that flickered through before she could manage it back into composure. She looked down at the coffee cup and turned it once in her hands. "She's not wrong," the woman said. Lily nodded, satisfied. She looked at Derek as if to say, "See?" Derek looked at the woman. Up close, the composed exterior held. The posture, the careful expression, the absolute refusal to look uncertain. But there was something around the eyes that the distance had obscured. A tiredness that had nothing to do with the hour. The kind that accumulates quietly over a long time and eventually becomes so familiar a person stops recognizing it in themselves. "The other kind," Lily had said. He understood it now. He just didn't know what to do with understanding it. "I'm Derek," he said, because it was the only thing that felt appropriate, and he had run out of ways to fill the silence. "Vivian," she said. She did not offer her last name, which told him something. People who used only their first names in introductions were either very casual or very private. She was not casual. There was a beat of quiet between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted. Lily had already turned to look at the fountain, apparently having accomplished whatever she came over to accomplish. Derek should have excused himself. That was still the right move. Polite, clean, no complications. He had Lily to think about. He had bread to buy. He had a dozen sensible reasons to say, "Nice to meet you," and walk away. Instead, he said, "There's a good cafe about a block from here. They do a dark roast that's worth the walk." He didn't fully know why he said it. Vivian looked at him for a moment, measuring something, though he couldn't tell what. "I have a call at 9, she said. "It's 7:40, he said. Another pause. Then she stood, tucked her dead coffee cup under one arm, and said, "Lead the way." The cafe was small and unhurried, the kind of place that still wrote orders by hand. They took a table near the window. Lily positioned herself in the chair between them without being asked, opened her book to a page she clearly hadn't been reading, and went quiet in the particular way she did when she was paying attention to everything. The conversation started the way conversations do when two people know almost nothing about each other and are being careful. Derek learned that Vivian worked in financial consulting, that her office was 4 blocks from the park, that she came to that bench sometimes between calls when she needed air. She learned that he did audio work, that Lily was in 2nd grade, that they lived nearby. Surface things, safe things. But Lily, without looking up from her book, said, "Dad makes really good soup." Vivian glanced at her. "Does he?" "He learned after Mom died. He said cooking gave him something to do with his hands." The table went quiet. Derek felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not grief exactly, not anymore, just the reflex of it. He watched Vivian's face for the reaction most people had. The visible discomfort, the reaching for the right words, the pivot to something lighter. He was used to navigating it. He had gotten efficient at making other people feel less awkward about his loss. Vivian didn't do any of that. She looked at Lily with an expression that was direct and unhurried and said, "That makes sense. Doing something with your hands helps." Lily looked up from her book for the first time since they'd sat down. She studied Vivian for a moment with that particular focus of hers, the one that made adults feel briefly transparent. "Do you cook?" Lily asked. "No," Vivian said. "What do you do with your hands?" A pause. "Work, mostly." Lily considered this. Then she went back to her book, apparently satisfied. Derek exhaled slowly. He had spent 3 years making the same calculation every time something unexpected entered their lives. Is this good for Lily? And if not, how quickly can I contain it? It was a good system. It had kept them steady. He had built their life on the premise that steady was enough, that wanting more than steady was how people got hurt. He looked at Vivian across the table. She was wrapping both hands around her coffee cup, the new one, still hot, and looking out the window with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not closed off, just accustomed to interiority the way some people are, the way he was, if he was honest. She turned and caught him looking. He didn't glance away quickly enough. "She does that a lot?" Vivian asked. "Says the thing everyone else is thinking?" "Since she could talk," Derek said. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Must be useful." "Mostly it's terrifying." She laughed at that, briefly, genuinely, in a way that seemed to catch her slightly off guard. When they left the cafe 20 minutes later, they stood on the sidewalk in the thin morning light, and Derek made the calculation one more time. He could end it here. A clean, polite conclusion. "Good to meet you, take care." Simple. Safe. He was good at safe. Instead, he said, "We're here most Saturday mornings, if you're ever around." He didn't dress it up, didn't oversell it, just offered it the way you offer something you're not sure will be accepted, and then wait without leaning. Vivian looked at him, then at Lily, who was crouching near a crack in the sidewalk where a small weed had pushed through the concrete, examining it with great seriousness. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, and she walked away. And Derek watched her go and thought, "This is probably nothing." He didn't believe it. She came back the following Saturday. Derek noticed her before Lily did, which surprised him. She was on the same bench, same coat, different coffee cup. This one she was actually drinking from. He told himself the noticing meant nothing. People return to the same park bench for the same reason they return to the same coffee order. Habit, convenience, the comfort of the familiar. It didn't have to mean anything. Lily noticed her 3 seconds later and said nothing at all, which meant she was pleased. They fell into something that wasn't quite a routine, but resembled one. Saturday mornings, the park, sometimes the cafe afterward. The conversations moved slowly from surface to something slightly below it. Not deep, not confessional, just more specific. The kind of specific that meant a person was choosing to be somewhere instead of just ending up there. Derek was careful. He was always careful, but he was careful in a new way now. The way of someone who has identified a risk and is watching it the way you watch a step you know is uneven. The risk was not Vivian. The risk was Lily. His daughter had not mentioned the word marry again after that first morning. She hadn't needed to. She had installed the idea and stepped back, the way you plant something and leave it to the conditions. What concerned Derek was the way Lily looked when Vivian arrived. Not excited. Lily was never visibly excited, just settled. The way she looked when something confirmed what she already believed. That look was the problem. Because if this ended, and Derek was experienced enough to understand the geometry of this, the distance between their lives, the sheer improbability of it, Lily would absorb it quietly and completely, the way she absorbed everything. And quiet damage was the kind Derek had no good tools for. He had built their life on a specific economy of hope. Want only what you can reasonably expect to have. It was not a pessimistic philosophy, it was a protective one. He had learned it the year Renata died, when he understood that the cruelest thing grief does is not take what you had, but expose how much you had been counting on what came next. He was not going to let Lily count on something that might not come. And yet he kept showing up on Saturday mornings. The distance he felt wasn't only about protecting Lily. There was something else, something he turned over privately during the week between Saturdays. Vivian existed in a world that operated by different rules than his. Her clients flew in from other cities. Her name appeared on things. She carried herself with the ease of someone for whom most doors had always opened. Not because she was careless, but because she had worked until the world rearranged itself around her expectations. Derek was not a man who thought small of himself. He knew his value, knew his work, knew the particular kind of dependability that made people trust him with their events, and their sound, and their most important rooms. But he was also honest. And honestly, he did not know what he was to Vivian. A curiosity, a pleasant interruption in her Saturday, a man whose daughter had said something memorable in a park. He didn't want to be someone's interesting detour. Vivian, for her part, gave him very little to read. She was warm in the way of someone who had decided warmth was appropriate, and guarded in the way of someone who had decided guardedness was necessary, and he could not always tell where one ended and the other began. She asked good questions. She listened in a way that felt genuine. But she never reached for anything. She never leaned in. He told himself that was information, that what a person didn't do told you as much as what they did. He just wasn't sure yet what it was telling him. It rained on the third Saturday, not heavily, just the steady, indifferent drizzle that makes outdoor plans impractical without quite justifying an umbrella. Derek and Lily arrived at the park anyway, out of habit, and turned immediately toward the cafe when they saw the sky had no intention of improving. They came through the door shaking water from their jackets, and Derek almost didn't see her at first. Vivian was already inside, same corner table by the window, a folder open in front of her, papers arranged with the deliberateness of someone who turns every surface into a workspace. She looked up when the bell above the door sounded. Something moved across her face, too quick to name, before she settled back into composure. "Rain out," Derek said. "Apparently," she said. Lily was already pulling out the chair across from her. They ordered. The rain continued. The cafe filled slightly with other people making the same calculation. Derek and Vivian talked around the edges of things the way they had learned to, and Lily sat between them eating a piece of banana bread with the focused attention she gave to all food she approved of. Then she looked up at Vivian and asked, without preamble, "Do you have anyone to eat dinner with?" The table shifted. Not physically, something in the air around it. Vivian set down her coffee cup. She looked at Lily with an expression Derek hadn't seen on her before. Not the composure, not any version of a managed smile, but something more careful. The face of someone deciding in real time whether to say the true thing. "Not really," she said. Lily nodded as though this confirmed something she had suspected. "We have extra chairs," she said. Then she went back to her banana bread. Derek looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at him. Neither of them spoke. He understood in that moment what he had been circling for 3 weeks without letting himself land on it. The problem had never been the distance between their lives, the difference in income, in status, in the worlds they moved through. That was real, but it was navigable. The actual problem was simpler and harder than that. Both of them were living inside a deficit they had stopped admitting to. He was missing someone to share the weight with. She was missing someone to sit across from. And they had both gotten so efficient at managing those absences that they'd stopped recognizing them as absences at all. A 7-year-old had identified this in under 30 seconds. Vivian came to dinner that Thursday. She arrived with a container of store-bought cookies, held them out to Lily at the door, and said simply, "I don't bake." Lily accepted them with complete seriousness and carried them to the kitchen counter like an offering. Derek made soup. After Lily went to bed, he and Vivian stayed at the kitchen table for another hour. The conversation was different without Lily in the room, more direct, less mediated. Vivian laughed once, genuinely, at something he said, and didn't seem to notice she'd done it. He noticed. When she left, she said, "Thank you for this." Simply, without the performative gratitude people used when they wanted to signal they'd had a good time. Just the words plainly meant. The next morning, he found a drawing on the kitchen table. Lily had left it before school. 3 figures sitting around a small table, a window with light coming through it, a pot on the stove. No labels, no explanation. She had drawn it in the careful way she did everything, with a seriousness of intention that made it feel less like a child's drawing and more like a document. Derek stood at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at it. He thought about all the ways he had learned to want less, how he had refined that skill until it felt like wisdom, how his daughter, who had lost more than most children her age, had apparently not learned it at all. He put the drawing on the refrigerator. Vivian stopped coming to the park. Not abruptly. There was no announcement, no explanation. She simply wasn't there the following Saturday, and then the one after that. Her texts became shorter, more delayed. The folder of reasons she had always been able to produce, an early call, a client in from out of town, a deadline that couldn't move, appeared with increasing frequency and decreasing specificity. Derek read them carefully, the way he read everything, and understood what they actually said. She was pulling back. He didn't chase it. That was a decision he made consciously, deliberately, in the way he made most decisions now, by sitting with the impulse first and asking what it was actually made of. Chasing her would have been easy. He knew how to be persistent. He also knew the difference between persistence and pressure, and he would not apply pressure to someone who hadn't asked for any of this. But her absence clarified something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. He had let himself want this. Not dramatically, not in a way he had announced to anyone, including himself, but quietly, consistently, in the way that mattered more than grand declarations. He had started factoring her into his thinking, started noticing things during the week that he set aside to tell her, started finding the Saturday morning ritual less complete than it used to be, and understanding exactly why. That was the thing he now had to reckon with. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had survived grief and single parenthood and the particular indignity of rebuilding a life from the inside out. He knew what hard felt like, and he had never confused hard with impossible. But this was a different kind of exposure. Grief had been done to it. This, the opening of himself toward another person, the willingness to want something that could be refused, this was chosen. And chosen vulnerability was the only kind that still scared him. He also had to be honest about something else. He did not want to be the man who needed saving. He did not want Vivian to look at him, at his small apartment, his irregular income, his daughter's drawings on the refrigerator, and feel generous. Generosity was not the same as wanting. He had enough self-respect to know the difference, and enough experience to know that the line between the two could blur without anyone meaning it to. If she came back, he needed it to be because she wanted to be there, not because she felt something for Lily that she was mistaking for something larger, not because his life was an interesting contrast to hers, because she wanted to be there. Lily noticed Vivian's absence with the same wordless precision she noticed everything. She didn't ask about it directly. What she did was quieter. She started setting 3 places at dinner without comment, then clearing the 3rd setting herself before they ate. Derek watched this happen twice before he understood it was not absent-mindedness. It was a form of keeping the door open. He didn't know whether to find that heartbreaking or instructive. What he settled on, after enough nights of sitting with it, was that he was tired of being the person who talked himself out of things before they had the chance to fail on their own terms. He had built a life on careful management of expectations, and that life was good. It was genuinely good. But good had started to feel lately like a ceiling he'd installed himself. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter who drew pictures of futures she believed in without apology. He had met someone who made him want to be less careful. He did not know what Vivian was going to do, but he knew, clearly and without dramatics, what he was hoping for. The event was a corporate fundraiser at a downtown venue, the kind Derek worked 3 or 4 times a year. High ceilings, expensive lighting, a client who wanted everything perfect and had the budget to mean it. He arrived 2 hours early the way he always did, ran cables, tested levels, positioned monitors. By the time guests arrived, he was invisible in the way good technicians were supposed to be, present enough to prevent problems, absent enough that no one thought about him. He didn't see her until the room was full. Vivian was near the back, standing with a group of people in the particular formation of professional acquaintances, close enough to constitute a conversation, spread enough to signal they hadn't chosen each other. She was dressed differently than he'd seen before. Still composed, still precise, but the coat was gone and she looked less armored. Same posture, something softer underneath it. She saw him across the room at almost the same moment he saw her. Neither of them moved toward the other immediately. The room was loud and full, and there was a buffer of plausible deniability. They could both look away and spend the evening as strangers who happened to occupy the same space. Derek considered it. Then he didn't. He caught her eye and nodded. She excused herself from her group. They found a quieter corner near the edge of the room, not far from his equipment station. She looked at the cables running along the baseboard, the monitors angled into the space, the small notebook he kept his cue list in, all the machinery of his work laid out in plain sight. "I didn't know you did these kinds of events," she said. "Most of my work looks like this," he said. "Different rooms, same cables." She nodded slowly, looking at the space the way she looked at things she was actually thinking about. He watched her take it in. Not the glamour of the venue, but his specific corner of it. The part that required showing up early and staying late and making sure everyone else's night ran smoothly. "You're good at it," she said, not a question. "I know how to read a room," he said. Then, because it was true and because he was done being cautious with true things, "Helps that I've had practice reading people." She looked at him. "You've been gone 2 weeks," he said, not accusatory, just factual. A pause. She looked away first, toward the room. "I know. You don't owe me an explanation." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its surface precision. Not much. Enough. "I built everything I have so I wouldn't need anyone. I was very deliberate about it, very thorough." She paused. "I didn't think about what it would feel like when it worked." Derek was quiet. He let the words sit where she had put them. "I'm scared too," he said. "Not of you. Of wanting something again and finding out I've forgotten how to do it without losing myself in it." She turned back to look at him. Something in her expression had shifted. Not collapsed, not softened into something easy. Just become more honest. The composure was still there, but it wasn't doing the same job it usually did. "That's a very specific fear," she said. "I've had time to name it," he said. The room moved around them. Somewhere across the venue, a speech was beginning, and the crowd quieted in that collective way crowds do, and for a moment, Derek and Vivian stood in their corner in something that felt less like silence and more like the end of a long detour. They had both said the true thing. It was out now, between them, where it couldn't be unfelt. Whatever they did next would be a choice, not an accident. Not a situation they drifted into. A choice. The days after the fundraiser were quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not the quiet of avoidance. That had a specific texture Derek had learned to recognize. A quality of managed distance, of conversations steered away from anything that might require honesty. This was a different kind. The quiet of 2 people who had said something real and were now living inside what that meant. No more plausible deniability. No more comfortable vagueness to retreat into. Derek went through his week the way he always did. Work, school pickup, dinner, Lily's reading homework, dishes, the particular end-of-day stillness that settled over the apartment after she fell asleep. But the stillness had a different quality now. It asked him something it hadn't asked before. He sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night, Lily's drawing still on the refrigerator, and let himself hold the question he had been managing around the edges for weeks. Did he believe he was allowed to have this? Not in the logistical sense. He understood the logistics could be navigated. Different schedules, different incomes, the ordinary friction of two lives finding their shape around each other. That wasn't what the question was really about. The real question was older than Vivian. It had been there since the year after Renata died, when he had slowly rebuilt himself into someone functional and steady and reliable, and had somewhere in that rebuilding quietly decided that those qualities, functional, steady, reliable, were enough to ask of himself. That wanting more was for people whose lives hadn't already required so much of them. He had told himself that was maturity. He understood now that it was also a way of not risking anything. Lily's voice came from the hallway. "Dad?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, squinting against the light. "You didn't come to bed." "It's only 9:30, Lily. You're sitting in the dark." He hadn't noticed. He reached over and turned on the lamp. She came and climbed into the chair beside him with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has never needed an invitation to be near her parent. She looked at the refrigerator, at her drawing, and then at him. "Are you thinking about Vivian?" she asked. He considered briefly, deflecting. "Yeah," he said, "I am." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Is it the scared kind of thinking or the regular kind?" He looked at her. "The scared kind." She nodded slowly, turning this over. "I think scared just means you care about it," she said. "Like how I felt before my swim test, but then I did it anyway." Derek didn't say anything for a long moment. He didn't know exactly where Lily stored these things, the quiet wisdoms she produced at unexpected moments, delivered without drama, as though she'd been sitting with them for a while and had simply decided the time was right. But he had learned not to question it when his daughter surfaced something that sounded true. Scared just means you care about it. He looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. 3 figures, a table, a window with light coming through. His daughter had drawn a future she believed in and put it on the refrigerator and gone to school and come home and gone to bed and not said a word about it since. Not because she was indifferent, because she was patient in a way that put him to shame. He was 34 years old and his 7-year-old daughter was braver than he was. "Go back to bed," he said. He kissed the top of her head. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, and this time he meant it. "I think I am." He texted her on a Wednesday morning, nothing elaborate, just her name and a question. "Are you around this Saturday?" She replied within the hour. "I can be." That was all, but he read it the way he read most things, carefully for what it actually said. She could be. Not "I'll try" or "let me check," which were the answers of someone looking for an exit. "I can be." The answer of someone who had already made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to act on it. Saturday arrived gray and cool, the kind of morning that felt more like late autumn than early spring. Derek brought 1 coffee for himself and a hot chocolate for Lily, and they took their usual route through the park. They turned onto the main path and Derek saw her immediately. Vivian was already there. Same bench. She was dressed differently than he was used to. No tailored coat, no boardroom posture held rigidly in place. Dark jeans, a wool sweater, her hair down for the first time he had seen. She was sitting with both hands around a coffee cup, watching the fountain. She looked, the word came to him quietly and without fanfare, rested. Not physically. Something in the expression, something behind the eyes that had been tightly wound for as long as he'd known her, and was now, very slightly, less so. She had brought an extra cup. It sat on the bench beside her, still steaming, placed where a person might sit. Lily saw it first. She slowed her pace almost imperceptibly, not stopping, not running ahead, just adjusting. She walked to the bench, looked at the extra cup, then looked at Vivian with the serious eyes that had started all of this. "You came back," Lily said. "I did," Vivian said. "Are you staying?" A pause, not a hesitant one, the pause of someone choosing words because they mean to keep them. "I'm working on it," Vivian said. Lily considered this. Then she climbed onto the bench on Vivian's left side, opened her book to a random page and began to read. Or appeared to. Derek had long since stopped being certain of the distinction. He sat down on Vivian's right. She handed him the extra cup without comment. He took it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The fountain ran. A dog barked somewhere across the park and then stopped. A jogger passed without looking at them. "You didn't have to do this," Derek said quietly. Not a challenge, not a test, just the truth of it offered plainly. "I know," Vivian said just as quietly. "That's why I wanted to." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead at the fountain, but the line of her jaw had released something it had been holding for as long as he'd known her. He had watched her maintain composure through conversations that would have unsettled most people. This was different. This was not composure. This was just her, sitting on a bench on a Saturday morning, having chosen to be exactly where she was. "For what it's worth," she said, still looking at the fountain, "I've had dinner alone in my apartment almost every night for 6 years. I stopped noticing until your daughter asked me about it." Derek was quiet for a moment. "She has that effect. I noticed." A pause. "She also drew me into a picture before she'd known me 2 weeks." "She put it on the refrigerator," Derek said. Vivian turned to look at him then. Something moved through her expression, full and unhurried, nothing being held at a careful distance. Something that stayed. "I know," she said. "I saw it." Lily turned a page she hadn't been reading. The fountain ran. The morning held the three of them in its gray, unhurried light, and nobody moved to leave it. The dinner happened on a Thursday, the way the first one had. Vivian arrived at 6:30. Derek made soup, the same one he always made, the recipe he had taught himself in the months after Renata died. The one that had started as something to do with his hands and had become, over time, the thing he made when he wanted a meal to feel like care. He hadn't told Vivian that. He thought she might understand it anyway. They ate at the small kitchen table, all three of them, with the overhead light on because the sun had gone down and nobody had thought to turn on the lamp in the living room. Lily talked more than usual, about a project at school, about a bird she had seen in the park that she was fairly certain was lost, about the book she was allegedly reading. Vivian listened and asked questions that showed she had been listening, and Derek watched this happen the way he watched things that were still new enough to feel fragile. After Lily went to bed, they stayed at the table. The soup pot was still on the stove. The apartment was quiet in the way it only was after Lily was asleep, a particular stillness, like the building itself exhaling. Vivian was looking at the refrigerator, at the drawing. He had forgotten in some ordinary domestic way that it was still there. It had become part of the kitchen the way things do when they've been in a place long enough. Unremarkable, present, part of the background of daily life. He looked at it now through her eyes. 3 figures at a small table, a window with light coming through, a pot on the stove. The pot Lily had drawn looked like a circle with a handle. The figures were simple and slightly uneven and unmistakable in their intention. Vivian had not moved her eyes from it. "She drew that before she'd known you 3 weeks," Derek said. "I know." Her voice was quiet. "I keep thinking about that. What she saw before either of us was willing to see it." "She's been doing that her whole life," Derek said, "seeing things before the rest of us catch up." Vivian was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm in that picture." "You are. And I don't want to leave it." He looked at her. She was still looking at the drawing, and her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it. No calibration, no management, nothing being held at a careful distance. Just a woman sitting in a kitchen she hadn't grown up in, looking at a child's drawing she had been placed inside of, saying the true thing. "Then don't," Derek said. She turned to look at him. He looked back. No performance between them now. No careful navigation of what this was or wasn't. Just 2 people who had taken a long time to stop talking themselves out of something that had been plain from the beginning. Outside, the city continued in its ordinary way. Inside, the light was on, and the soup pot was cooling, and down the hall a 7-year-old was asleep, having done the most important work here months ago, in a park, on a Saturday morning, with a certainty that had never once wavered. She had looked at a stranger, and seen what that stranger needed. She had looked at her father and known what he was afraid to want. And she had said the true thing, quietly into his ear, the way children say the things adults have forgotten how to say out loud. She looks really tired. The other kind. She had not been wrong. That's the story of Derek, Lily, and Vivian. A little girl who hadn't yet learned to look away from the truth. A father who had spent 3 years being strong for everyone but himself. And a woman who had built a life so complete it had no room left for living. None of them were looking for this. But sometimes the most important things find you on an ordinary Saturday morning, through the eyes of a child who doesn't yet know that honesty is something you're supposed to grow out of. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that being seen, really seen, is still one of the things we need most, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We tell stories like this one every week, the kind that don't make the news but stay with you anyway. We'll see you in the next one.